Hey guys, this is me Nivedh Kannada. So, it's been one of my all-time dreams to learn rigging and animating characters or animals in Blender. I know I wasn't putting much effort into learning animation techniques such as rigging, shape keys, or voids. The main reason for that is number 1, I don't get much time because of online classes. Number 2, I'm so lazy. And number 3 is that those things are not so easy to get started with in the first place. So, I finally felt like putting enough effort into a personal project that can go beyond the time constraints of a single day. My problem was that whenever I work on a personal project, I try to finish it in the day that I started working on it. Most of my projects that you can see on my Instagram page are like that. Yeah, mostly one-day projects. Recently, I felt like I shouldn't be this lazy to put much effort into personal projects and decided to finish a project only when I feel satisfied on its result. And that is how I ended up giving myself this new project. I would like to call it Project HoneyBee. So, let's see an overview of which all things I did. This project was created with the idea of Blender's non-linear animation in mind, which means that I can reuse this HoneyBee in whichever future projects that I work on, without worrying much about setting up all the motion keyframes again. Modeling the HoneyBee was surprisingly very easy for me. I was basically blocking out the shape of a honeybee based on some reference image that I got from the internet. I simply added some UV spheres, extruded the geometry here and there to get it to match the shapes in the reference image. It's basically a bunch of distorted UV spheres and cylinders in Blender. Since the model geometry is based on the Blender primitives, the topology is already really good, and it came out to be a low poly but still fairly detailed 3D model. I initially added some hair particles on the middle sphere and the legs to replicate the hairs on real honeybees. But that turned out to be a bit too resource heavy, making the animation process less enjoyable. Since this is my first time working on a personal project of this scale, and my goal is in realism here, I decided to hide those hair particles in the final render. That is especially because I don't want to spend days for just rendering the scenes. After I finished modeling the honeybee, I moved on to rig it with bounds and inverse kinematics. But later I figured out that setting up IK constraints is a lot more work, especially when the model is not similar to a human shape. So I left that plan and did a basic rig on the model with a minimum number of bonds in the rig. Since I added the legs on the other side by using a mirror modifier, and since I named the bonds in the correct format, it was very easy to symmetrize a rig with a single click. I was adding the materials on each object in the same time I was rigging. I know that's not the correct workflow, but I felt the need to change certain parameters while working on the rig and had to make some material changes. After fiddling around with a lot of rigging, materials and geometry, I finally decided to start working on the animations. My plan was to use the action editor to create multiple actions and store them in the Blender file. To do this, I moved on to the animation workspace in Blender and made sure the bottom part has action editor opened in the timeline. Then I created the first action called flying. It was a lot of trial and error to get the movements to look close to a real honeybee. I searched for some reference on how a honeybee moves its wings when flying, legs when walking, etc. And then I tried to replicate those motions by moving the individual bonds of the rig and manually keyframing each movement. It took a lot of time, but I was satisfied with how the flying animation looked in the end. And then I created other actions such as idle standing, landing transition, landing touchdown, drinking honey, and walking. That was when I realized that to save these actions, we have to press the stash button with the tiny snowflakes icon. This puts our animation keyframes into the non-linear animation editor of Blender, which I had opened on the left pane in Blender. It was when working on some other actions that I realized that some bonds are affecting the movements of some irrelevant body parts of the honeybee. It was then that I realized that I had to select a bond, shift select the body parts, to weight paint each of them in order to get the motion to be perfect. After creating all the actions, I saved the file as a new file to work on the grass field animation that you saw. And then I made a grass field environment using some assets that I got from Blender Kit add-on and some particle systems with the displaced terrain plane as the ground. Then I did some fancy camera movements and set up multiple scenes to get the desired animation. This was a fun project to work on. I could learn a lot of things about the animation workflow just by working on this one project, and I consider that to be extremely valuable. I have enjoyed the whole process. I hope you enjoyed this video too. Thanks a lot for watching. This is Nivedh Kannada signing off.